From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I'm here to announce the indictment by a special grand jury of 3 current or former Chicago police officers. The indictment makes clear that it is unacceptable to obey an unofficial code of silence.
As 3 Chicago police officers face charges of cover-up for the police shooting of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, we'll look at the cases of Philando Castile, Sam DuBose, Sylville Smith, 3 black men killed by police officers who in recent weeks, 2 of them were acquitted, 1 had a mistrial. Our first guest writes, "It's not just police officers who are on trial. America is on trial. Either these deaths are justified and therefore America is just, or these deaths are unjustified and America is unjust." We'll speak with historian Ibram X. Kendi. Then, a shocking lawsuit accuses the Washington, D.C. police of using sexual abuse as a form of punishment, targeting people arrested while protesting Donald Trump's inauguration.
Today, we are filing suit on behalf of several courageous individuals who are willing to stand up and say to the police, enough.
And we go to Brazil, where President Michel Temer has been formally charged with corruption a year after he backed the ouster of President Dilma Rousseff from office. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's postponed the vote on the Republican health care plan after facing a revolt from members of his own party.
Good afternoon, everyone. As I think you may have already heard, we're going to continue the discussions within our conference on the differences that we have, that we're continuing to try to litigate. Consequently, we will not be on the bill this week, but we're still working toward getting at least 50 people in a comfortable place.
The Congressional Budget Office says 22 million Americans would lose their health insurance under the Senate Republicans' health care bill over the next decade. The legislation now faces opposition from 9 Senate Republicans, all Senate Democrats, and a slew of governors from both parties, the majority of the health care industry, the American Medical Association, hospitals, doctors, nurses, patient advocacy groups, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and even members of the far-right Koch brothers political network. McConnell's announcement of the vote's delay came as activists staged multiple protests against the Senate health care bill. In Washington, D.C., Planned Parenthood staged a people's filibuster against the legislation. The protest included dozens of women dressing in red cloaks and white bonnets, inspired by the dystopian novel and TV series The Handmaid's Tale, about a totalitarian theocracy which overthrows the U.S. government and imposes power by subjugating women and controlling their reproductive rights. Also on Tuesday, activists with the disability rights group ADAPT held a sit-in in the office of Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner, demanding he oppose the legislation. As Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was forced to delay a vote on the GOP health care bill because of infighting within the Republican Party, America First Policies, a pro-Trump group sanctioned by the White House, launched a $1 million TV and radio ad campaign attacking Republican Senator Dean Heller of Nevada over his opposition to the health care bill.
Strong leadership and a real chance to repeal and replace Obamacare with patient-centered care that protects American families. Senator Dean Heller is saying no. Call Senator Heller. Tell him America needs him to keep his promise.
Reportedly, Senator Heller raised the issue with President Trump himself, and as well, Mitch McConnell raised it with the White House. The attack ad offers further evidence of infighting with the Republican Party. Meanwhile, on the Democratic Party side, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become the latest politician to back a single-payer health care system. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal Tuesday, she said, quote, "President Obama tried to move us forward with health care coverage by using a conservative model that came from one of the conservative think tanks that had been advanced by a Republican governor in Massachusetts. Now it's time for the next step, and the next step is single payer," Senator Warren told the Wall Street Journal. The White House has issued additional information about its claim that the Syrian government was preparing for a possible chemical weapons attack. On Tuesday, Pentagon spokesperson Captain Jeff Davis said the U.S. had recently observed activity at Shayrat Airfield, the same airbase from which the U.S. and human rights groups say the Syrian government allegedly carried out a chemical weapons attack in April that killed 86 people in the town of Khan Sheikhoun. Spokesman Davis said the activity, quote, involves specific aircraft in a specific hangar, both of which we know to be associated with chemical weapons use, unquote. However, the White House faced continued skepticism from the intelligence community Tuesday about the claims, as well as about the release of the White House statement Monday warning Syrian President Assad of retaliation in the event of a chemical weapons attack. 5 unnamed military officials told BuzzFeed they did not know about the intelligence before the statement's release or that the White House was even preparing to release a statement. The statement appears to be aimed at drumming up American public support for an upcoming U.S. military strike against the Syrian government. Both the Syrian and Russian governments have rejected the White House claims. Meanwhile, in Syria, a U.S.-led coalition airstrike has reportedly killed at least 40 civilians who are being imprisoned by ISIS in the eastern Syrian town of al-Mayadeen on Monday. The airstrike was reported by both the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and the local news outlet Deir ez-Zor 24. The U.S.-led coalition acknowledges carrying out airstrikes on the town Sunday and Monday and striking ISIS-controlled buildings and infrastructure. The coalition says it's investigating the reports of civilian casualties. In Yemen, more than 2,000 people have died from a massive cholera outbreak as the ongoing U.S.-backed Saudi-led bombing campaign has devastated Yemen's health, water, and sanitation systems. On Tuesday, the World Health Organization said, quote, "We have never seen something so explosive as Yemen," unquote. This is Dr. Ismail Al-Mansouri.
The influx of patients to the hospital is huge. The amount of suspected cases has reached 200,000, with more than 2,000 deaths.
Mansouri was speaking from a hospital in Yemen. In Venezuela, members of the police attacked multiple government buildings using a stolen police helicopter Tuesday, throwing grenades at the Venezuelan Supreme Court building and firing shots at the Interior Ministry headquarters in the latest escalation of Venezuela's political crisis. This is police pilot Oscar Perez standing in front of armed men in a video statement released Tuesday.
Venezuelans, dear brothers, we speak to you from the state. We are a group of military officials, police and civilians in the search for balance and against this transitory criminal government. We do not belong to, nor do we have a partisan political leaning. We are nationalists, patriots, institutionalists. This combat is not with the rest of the security forces of the state. It is against the impunity imposed by this government.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has called Tuesday's attack terrorism and an attempted coup and has activated the armed forces. The attack came shortly after clashes broke out between opposition lawmakers and Venezuelan National Guardsmen. The Venezuelan Supreme Court has been the target of fierce criticism from the right-wing opposition after recent rulings ended parliamentary immunity and granted the judiciary temporary legislative powers, though the court later annulled both rulings. Tuesday's attack comes amidst months of massive anti-government protests in Venezuela. In Colombia, the FARC celebrated its disarmament on Tuesday in another historic step in the end of Colombia's 53-year civil war. This is FARC leader Timaleon Jiménez.
Today doesn't end the existence of the FARC. In truth, what we are putting an end to is our 53-year armed struggle, but we will continue to exist as a movement of legal and democratic character, which will develop its ideological, political, and organizational actions and its propaganda through exclusively legal methods, peacefully, without weapons.
In China, authorities have released 3 activists with the group China Labor Watch who were arrested after investigating labor conditions at a factory that makes shoes for Trump's daughter and senior advisor, Ivanka Trump, or the Ivanka Trump brand. Their release comes after the Chinese government invited Ivanka Trump and her husband, Jared Kushner, to Beijing later this year for an official visit. To see our full interview about the 3 activists, go to democracynow.org. An international cyber attack struck computers in Ukraine, Australia, and the United States Tuesday in the latest instance of hackers unleashing an attack using a cyber weapon stolen from the National Security Agency. The cyber attack shut down the radiation monitoring systems at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, stopped dozens of Ukrainian ATMs from working, and affected companies' computer systems worldwide, from a U.S. drug manufacturer to a Danish shipping company to an Australian chocolate factory. The telecommunications company IDT said, quote, "The NSA needs to take a leadership role in working closely with security and operating system platform vendors such as Apple and Microsoft to address the plague that they've unleashed," unquote. Back in the United States in Chicago, 3 current and former Chicago police officers were indicted Tuesday on felony charges for conspiring to cover up the 2014 police killing of Laquan McDonald, a 17-year-old African-American teenager. This is Special Prosecutor Patricia Brown Holmes.
This indictment alleges that these defendants lied about what occurred during a police-involved shooting in order to prevent independent criminal investigators from learning the truth. The indictment makes clear that it is unacceptable to obey an unofficial code of silence.
The officers face up to 5 years in prison if convicted. The officer who killed Laquan McDonald, Jason Van Dyke, is awaiting trial on 6 counts of first-degree murder. The killing of McDonald was captured on a police dash cam video released under court order, which clearly contradicted police claims about the shooting. The video shows the teenager posing no threat and walking away from the officers before Van Dyke opens fire on him. Washington, D.C. has begun issuing the nation's first gender-neutral driver's licenses in a victory for LGBT activists. D.C. residents can now choose to have their gender marked as X instead of either male or female. The state of Oregon will also begin issuing gender-neutral driver's licenses and identification cards on July 1st. And in Athens, Georgia, a candlelight vigil was held Monday night to commemorate the life of 17-year-old Ava Ray Barron, a transgender teenager who was murdered Sunday. LGBT advocates say she is the 14th transgender woman of color to be murdered so far this year. Local media has misgendered Ava in the initial news articles about her death. The alleged shooter has been arrested and charged with her murder. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. 3 current and former Chicago police officers were indicted Tuesday on felony charges for conspiring to cover up the 2014 police shooting death of Laquan McDonald, the 17-year-old African-American teenager. Special Prosecutor Patricia Brown Holmes announced the charges.
I'm here to announce the indictment by a special grand jury of 3 current or former Chicago police officers. Officers Joseph Walsh and Thomas Gaffney and Detective David March have been charged with obstruction of justice, official misconduct, and conspiracy to commit both of these offenses. These charges are brought in connection with the police-involved shooting of Laquan McDonald in October of 2014. Investigating and charging police officers with crimes relating to their duties is a sobering responsibility. While they are sworn to serve and protect as well as uphold the law, they are not above the law. This indictment alleges that these defendants lied about what occurred during a police-involved shooting in order to prevent independent criminal investigators from learning the truth. The indictment makes clear that it is unacceptable to obey an unofficial code of silence.
The officers face up to 5 years in prison if convicted. The officer who shot Laquan McDonald, Jason Van Dyke, is awaiting trial on 6 counts of first-degree murder. The killing of Laquan McDonald was captured on a police dash cam video released under court order, which clearly contradicted police claims about the shooting. The video shows the teenager posing no threat and walking away from the officers before Van Dyke opens fire. The news from Chicago comes on the heels of major developments in a series of other police shooting cases. In Ohio, a second mistrial was recently declared in the murder case of former University of Cincinnati police officer Ray Tensing, who shot African-American Samuel DuBose in the head after pulling him over for having a missing front license plate in 2015. The officer, Tensing, was wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with a Confederate battle flag under his uniform when he killed DuBose. Meanwhile, in Minnesota, police officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted of manslaughter for killing African-American motorist Philando Castile during a traffic stop. And in Milwaukee, police officer Dominique Hagan Brown was acquitted of charges of reckless homicide for shooting and killing 23-year-old African-American Sylville Smith. The recent cases highlight how rare it is for police officers to be convicted for on-duty shootings. According to Bowling Green State University professor Philip Stinson, about 900 to 1,000 people are fatally shot by police officers in the United States every year. But since 2005, just 29 local law enforcement officers have been convicted in on-duty shootings. We're joined right now by historian Ibram X. Kendi, a professor of history and international relations and founding director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. He's the author of Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, which is winner of the 2016 National Book Award. Professor Kendi recently wrote a piece for the New York Times headlined Sacrificing Black Lives for the American Lie. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor Kendi. Can you start off by responding to the latest indictment for the cover-up of the death of Laquan McDonald, 3 Chicago police officers, and then we'll talk about the acquittals and the mistrial.
So first of all, I think it's a good development for Chicago. It's a good development for people who are seeking justice for McDonald's death. But I think it's indicative of a larger cover-up, and I think of a cover-up of the racism that's persisting among these policing forces within the criminal justice system. So what these officers did, I think, was not surprising to many people. What's actually surprising is that they were charged for it. And so what I'm hoping, as I'm sure many people are, is that this will become a new pattern in which police officers can no longer cover up their mistakes, their lethal mistakes that end in Black death.
Now, this latest indictment of the 3 Chicago police officers come after weeks of acquittals and mistrials, 3 in all, 2 acquittals of police officers and 1 mistrial of a police officer in very high-profile cases. For example, the case of Philando Castile. And I wanted to turn to video of the 4-year-old daughter of Diamond Reynolds consoling her heartbroken mother, who's handcuffed in the back of a police squad car minutes after St. Anthony police officer Geronimo Yanez shot and killed her boyfriend, Philando Castile. This has been just a shocking case. The video from last July shows Reynolds mourning Castile's death and cursing before her daughter Diane begs her to stop, saying, "I don't want you to get shooted."
Mom, please stop saying cuss words and screaming because I don't want you to get shooted. Okay, give me a kiss. My phone just died, that's all. I can keep you safe. It's okay, I got it, okay? Come here. I can't believe they just did that.
The release of the footage came a day after police dashcam video was made public for the first time after the trial, showing Officer Yanez firing his gun 7 times within moments of approaching Philando Castile's car over a broken taillight. Let's go to the clip of that video.
Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me.
Don't reach for it, then. Don't pull it out.
I'm not pulling it out.
Don't pull it out.
Don't pull it out!
He wasn't.
Don't move!
Oh, man, I can't.
Don't move!
Oh, my
Don't move!
Oh, my God, I'm shaking.
Don't move!
Don't move, baby.
Code 3! Get the baby girl out of here!
Officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted of manslaughter in that case. Ibram X. Kendi, can you respond to what's happened over the last few weeks?
Well, I think that's what I attempted to do in the New York Times piece. And, you know, I tried to sort of think about how is it that jurors, how is it that their defenders could look at the facts of the Castile case, could look at the facts of some of these other cases, and still acquit these police officers and still make the case that these police officers did nothing wrong, and still make the case that these black people who are died did everything wrong. And you know, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that basically in making the case that these police officers were racist, the Americans would have to make the case that their nation is racist. And as you know, I mean, there's been so many Americans who've fell in love with this idea that their nation is post-racial. And they're doing everything in their power to sort of defend that idea. And the way they end up defending it is by constantly blaming black people for these incidents with police. And it's just, I mean, it's just really heartbreaking that Americans, that people, that police officers, that jurors, that judges cannot really look at the facts of this case. And it leads me to believe that really the opposite of Black Lives Matter, you know, is not Black lives do not matter. It's that Black death matters. And that activists have been trying to eliminate this normality of Black death mattering for the life of America's post-racial idea.
We're going to go to break, and we come back. I want to talk to you more about your book, an astonishing book, Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, and the people you profile in this, from President Thomas Jefferson to W.E.B. Du Bois, from Angela Davis to Cotton Mather. You go back through history and look at the future. We're talking to historian Ibram X. Kendi, professor of history and international relations and founding director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. His book won the National Book Award. This is Democracy Now!, back in a minute. Black Man by the jazz pianist and educator Jerry Allen. She died on Tuesday at the age of 60. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're joined today by historian Ibram X. Kendi, professor of history and international relations, founding director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. He just left the University of Florida at Gainesville. He's the author of the National Book Award-winning Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. If you could take us through your thesis, Professor Kendi, as you raise the profile of 5 figures through history, right through today, Angela Davis, and talk about their role in our history.
Sure. And so the thesis for the book actually came about through researching for the book, which I think is a good thing. And that was I ended up entering into this history of racist ideas, believing this common idea that really the sort of origins, the cradle of racist ideas is ignorance and hate. And that ignorance and hate leads to racist ideas. And it's these people who have these racist ideas who are the people who institute racist policies like slavery, segregation, and even mass incarceration. And so the more I sort of study this history, the more I contextualize the development of these ideas in their historical moment. And more importantly, the more I distinguish between the producers of racist ideas and the consumers and decided to study the producers, the more I found that people were producing racist ideas to justify existing racist policies. In other words, racist policies were becoming before racist ideas. And those racist policies were emerging out of self-interest. And so you had economic, political, and even cultural self-interest driving the creation of racially discriminatory policies. And then the need to justify those policies led to the development of racist ideas. And then those racist ideas and their circulation, or more so consumption, led to our ignorance and hate. And so I chronicle this history through 5 major characters. And the first character is Cotton Mather, who was a Boston theologian who, at the time, he lived from the 1660s to the 1720s, race or racial ideas were largely theological ideas, because theological ideas were largely scientific ideas. And so he was involved in popularizing many of the early theological ideas justifying or making the case for black inferiority. By the emergence of the United States, the racial discourse became more secular, and particularly through the role of Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson died on the eve of the abolitionist movement, Thomas Jefferson being the second major character in the text. And that abolitionist movement was largely spearheaded by William Lloyd Garrison, who, of course, was the third major character. And W.B. Du Bois was the fourth major character. He, of course, was one of the sort of fathers of civil rights and black power. And the last major character that covers the last 50 years, where mass incarceration in particular became front and center, was Angela Davis.
And so talk about, from Cotton Mather to Angela Davis, how they embodied your idea of how racist policies and ideas develop.
So in the case of Cotton Mather was involved in probably the first great American debate over race, which was whether black people could become Christians. And slaveholders who were also Christian made the case that black people were too barbaric. Cotton Mather, being a major Boston theologian, being a major minister, wanting to have a new group of people to proselytize to, made the case that they can be Christianized because their souls have the capacity to be white, even though their bodies are black and inferior and worthy of enslavement. And so this debate, he made this case for this debate because he wanted to open up the sort of reins on the church to be able, particularly the Puritan church, to be able to proselytize to black people. So he had this sort of hidden self-interest, this hidden cultural self-interest that led to his idea. And you know, Thomas Jefferson, as many of you would understand, I mean, he was a slaveholder who, of course, wanted to create ideas that allowed him to continue slaveholding. And, you know, all the way up to sort of Angela Davis. Angela Davis, I chronicle as, you know, this major anti-racist theorist, because I really sort of show the debate, really, between racist and anti-racist ideas. And I show, particularly within the realm of criminal justice, that, you know, all of these ideas justifying law and order, justifying the war on drugs, justifying tough on crime, and now justifying police being you know, exonerated for killing black lives, that Angela Davis was long at the forefront of challenging those ideas by challenging the racist ideas that were underlying them.
You write very poignantly in the prologue to Stamped from the Beginning. I somehow managed to write this book between the heartbreaks of Trayvon Martin and Rekia Boyd and Michael Brown and Freddie Gray and the Charleston Nine and Sandra Bland, heartbreaks that are a product of America's history of racist ideas, as much as this history book of racist ideas is a product of these heartbreaks. Young black males were 21 times more likely to be killed by police than their white counterparts between 2010 and 2012, according to federal statistics. And you go on to say, the underrecorded, underanalyzed racial disparities between female victims of lethal police force may be even greater. Federal data show the median wealth of white households is a staggering 13 times the median wealth of black households, and black people are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than whites. Talk more about this.
Sure. Well, Amy, this is, since the beginning of the United States, since the beginning of colonial America, there has been what's called racial disparities, as you just outlined. Racial disparities where black people were more likely to be poor, black people were more likely to be killed by the police, black people were more likely to be in prison. And so the question becomes why? Why is it that black people are on the lower end of these racial disparities? Why does racial inequality exist in this country? And really, the racial debate has largely been trying to answer that question. And really, Stamped from the Beginning chronicles that long racial debate trying to answer that question. And really, there's been 3 positions, and those positions still persist to this day. The first position states that it's because black people are inferior. The reason why so many more black people are being killed by the police is because black people keep acting recklessly before the police. If black people would act better, then this would not be a problem. So they principally state that there's something wrong and inferior about black people. This is what I call the segregationist position. On the other side of the debate has been the anti-racist position. The anti-racist position states that the racial groups are equal. There's nothing wrong or right about black people or any other racial group of people. So because the racial groups are equal, these disparities, these inequities must be the result of racial discrimination. So they spend their time challenging racial discrimination. And then the third position, which is called the assimilationist position, actually argues both. Typically and historically, they've stated that, yes, there is racial discrimination, but there's also something wrong and inferior about black people. And so they've sought to civilize and develop black people at the same time they were challenging racial discrimination.
So talk about where Black Lives Matter fits into this picture, the organizing from the grassroots up, and where you see it going.
Yeah, I think it fits precisely into this picture because I think Black Lives Matter activists have made the case that the problem is the criminal justice system, that the problem is racist policing, that the problem is the laws that are being created that make the case that there's something wrong with the people, as opposed to the environment that these people, the lack of jobs and resources these people are being faced with. And so I'm hoping, and I'm sure many people are hoping, that Black Lives Matter and many other activists, anti-racist activists, who've been inspired by Black Lives Matter and other types of activists will recognize the anti-racist position, which is that either the racial groups are equal or they're not. And if you believe that the racial groups are not equal, that there's something wrong or inferior about black people, that's a racist idea. And so you cannot continue to imagine that this nation is post-racial at the same time that you don't believe that the racial groups are equal, that you're championing policies that actually discriminate against black people.
Talking to historian Ibram X. Kendi. His book won the National Book Award, Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. And you talk about overall racial inequities, from everything from wealth to health. Certainly, when we look at what's happening right now in the Senate, though the health care bill has been put off for the moment, now opposed by 9 Republicans who run the political spectrum, feeling that regulations like what Senator Paul of Kentucky have to be stricter, that Medicaid and other healthcare policies and safety nets have to be dismantled, to those who feel that this is way too stringent. But always at the bottom of this, you have the most vulnerable in society. So talk about from wealth to health, Professor Kendi.
So, I mean, from wealth, I mean, the Great Recession, some have made the case, was one of the largest losses of black wealth in American history, one of the largest losses of Latino wealth in American history, that when we have these major economic catastrophes, you know, those people who are the most sort of underprivileged are most likely to lose out. But I think the healthcare debate and really argument, I think, is even more indicative, you know, of what we're talking about. I mean, the Affordable Care Act led to 11% more black and Latino people becoming insured, which is a dramatic sort of development within black America, within Latino America. And so it eliminated these massive disparities, or it didn't eliminate it, reduced these disparities between racial groups that are uninsured. And so, you know, to think about a new health care bill that's going to reduce the number of people increase the number of people who are uninsured. I mean, many of those people are probably going to be black or Latino, and then therefore we're going to have an increase in these disparities. And then what racist ideas will say is, well, it's those black people's fault. It's those Latinos' fault. You know, they should, you know, be working harder. There's something wrong with them. And so they'll create racist ideas to justify those disparities. And I should also say that you know, I think one of the most consequential manifestations in this country that black life does not matter is the disparity between how long black people live. I mean, white people are more like have a lifespan of 3.5 years in this country, and I think, you know, many of these things sort of result in that, including people having access to health care.
You're writing a new book on how to be an anti-racist, which will be released next year. Can you give us a little preview?
So you asked about the, Amy, ask the question again, I'm sorry?
I was just saying you're writing a new book, How
yes.
to Be an Anti-Racist. Give us a preview.
Sure. So I mentioned in the prologue of Stamped from the Beginning that, you know, before I could chronicle anyone else's racist ideas, I first had to come to grips with my own. And so really, in How to Be an Anti-Racist, I want to sort of chronicle my journey, my personal journey of really, you know, being raised and consuming many racist ideas to seeking to become somebody who is an anti-racist. And so I begin the book with a speech that I gave in high school in which I uttered all of these racist ideas, all of these things stating that there's something wrong with black people. And I take readers through my own personal journey while simultaneously revealing many of the concepts of what it means to be an anti-racist.
Finally, Ibram X. Kendi, can you tell us the origins of your name?
Sure. So Ibram was given to me by my parents. It means exalted father. It's a derivative of Abraham. Came up in a Christian church, a Christian family. My parents were part of the Black theology movement in the early 70s. And my last name, Kendi, with my wife and I, when we wed in 2003, we decided to choose a name together. And so Kendi is a Meru in Kenya name that means loved one.
And you unveiled this at your wedding to your family and friends?
Yes.
Well, Ibram X. Kendi, I want to thank you for being with us, Professor of History and International Relations and founding director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. He's just leaving the University of Florida at Jacksonville. He's the author of Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, which is winner of the 2016 National Book Award. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we look at a lawsuit in Washington against the Washington, D.C. police for their treatment of protesters at the inauguration of President Trump. Stay with us. I Will Spite Survive, a new song by the band Deerhoof featuring Jen Wasner. Visit democracynow.org, where we're premiering the full song. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. As we turn now to a shocking new lawsuit filed by the American Civil Liberties Union, which charges police in Washington, D.C. use sexual abuse as a form of punishment after hundreds were arrested during protests against Donald Trump's inauguration, January 20th. A complaint by 4 plaintiffs charges officers stripped them, grabbed their genitals, inserted fingers into their anuses while other officers laughed. This is Plaintiff Shay Horse, a photojournalist, addressing a press conference last week. A warning to our audience, the following clip includes graphic language.
When they began to formally arrest us after sunset, they handcuffed us with zip ties that were so tight, several fingers on both my hands went numb. When I asked an officer to loosen the ties, he replied, "They're not supposed to be comfortable." Finally, they took us away from the kettle. We spent what seemed like hours in a police van. Sometimes with the van not even moving, sometimes with the officers outside the van doing nothing at all. When we finally got out of the van, we appeared to be at some sort of training facility with an area that was set to look like a mock street. A group of officers, maybe a dozen, lined up 5 male detainees, including myself. An officer told us to drop our pants. An officer went down the row telling each of us not to flinch as he grabbed our balls and yanked on them, and then stuck his finger up each of our anuses and wiggled it around. I felt like they were using molestation and rape as punishment. They used those tactics to inflict pain and misery on people who were supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. It felt like they were trying to break me and the others. Break us so that even if the charges didn't stick, that night would be our punishment. I was in police custody for about 33 hours. My anus was still sore when I was released. The effects of my arrest and detention on January 20th are still with me months later. A couple of the fingers on my left hand are still numb. I continue to suffer stress and anxiety. I have trouble sleeping. I wake up every 3 hours. I'm still trying to come to grips with what happened in the training facility. I feel like I was raped.
That was photojournalist Shay Horse speaking at an ACLU press conference last week. Democracy Now! Invited D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department to join us on the show, but they declined our offer. In a statement, the D.C. Police Department promised an investigation, but defended its officers' actions, saying all arrests on January 20th were proper. For more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Scott Michelman, senior attorney for the ACLU of the District of Columbia. He's a lecturer at Harvard Law School. Scott Michelman, welcome to Democracy Now! Explain what happened and what this lawsuit is all about.
Well, thank you, Amy. This lawsuit is about the troubling and unconstitutional conduct of the Metropolitan Police Department on Inauguration Day. On that day, thousands of people came to Washington, D.C. to express their views and express their opposition to the inauguration of Donald Trump. And this is, of course, the nation's capital, a place where people should feel freest to express their views, to express their dissent and their opinions. Now, most people on that day were peaceful, but there were some windows broken, some trash cans overturned. The problem was, in response to those actions, the Metropolitan Police conducted a massive roundup. They pepper sprayed indiscriminately all the demonstrators in the area. Hundreds of people got pepper sprayed without warning or dispersal order, and without individually doing anything wrong. Then the MPD kettled, that is set up a mass detention for over 200 people who were not selected because they had engaged in wrongdoing, but because they were on the street where the police had decided to set up the kettle. In effect, they were rounded up and detained for their proximity and perhaps their agreement of the ideas of a handful of people who were engaging in law-breaking, which is nothing more than guilt by association. Then, in custody, the detainees were deprived of food, water, and access to toilets for many hours. And finally, and perhaps most disturbingly, a number of the detainees, including 2 of our clients, were subjected to manual rectal probing by an officer putting his finger up their anuses, grabbing on their testicles, and we've heard reports that it was more widespread than the 5 individuals you heard Shay Horse describe there. But 2 of those individuals are our plaintiffs, and we think there are more detainees who were punished in that manner.
I wanted to go to the D.C. Police Chief, Peter Newsham, who appeared on the radio station WAMU on Friday. Let's go to a clip.
Some folks have suggested that the Metropolitan Police Department, it's a very small group of people, rounded up protesters or demonstrators and indiscriminately arrested them.
Journalists and legal observers were in the group that was arrested?
They were. And so people have suggested that, the Metropolitan Police Department indiscriminately rounded up protesters and demonstrators on that day, and nothing could be further from the truth. The Metropolitan Police Department arrested rioters on that day.
I also wanted to go to another one of your clients, Scott, Baltimore resident Elizabeth Legasse, who traveled to D.C. to peacefully protest President Trump's inauguration.
I peacefully marched down the street, attempting to catch up with a group of other demonstrators. Although I did not engage in any acts of vandalism, the next thing I knew, police were firing pepper spray and tear gas everywhere. They never warned us or told us to disperse. I've seen other protests where police used pepper spray, so I brought a pair of my old chemistry lab safety goggles to protect my eyes. But their irritants burned my face and made me feel like I was choking. I ran away from all the chaos, along with the other protesters. But everywhere we turned, intersections were blocked. Police eventually chased us into a kind of pen set up at the corner of 12th and L, where they held us for hours. They even pepper sprayed us while we were in the kettle, even though we couldn't move and weren't doing anything to provoke them. The chemicals made me cough and made the crowded conditions even more claustrophobic. Many of us asked for food or bathrooms, but the officers refused to provide anything, or even answer questions like, why were we detained? Finally, after several hours, they started to formally arrest us, one by one. It seemed like they were moving as slowly as they could, even as it got colder and started to rain. Meanwhile, I had no way to clean the pepper spray from my face. It continued to burn everywhere my goggles didn't cover.
That was Elizabeth Legasse. The ACLU lawsuit also represents Judah Ariel, a D.C. resident who volunteered as a legal observer with the National Lawyers Guild during the inauguration. Ariel says he wore a bright green hat to clearly identify himself as a legal observer, but he still was pepper sprayed by D.C. police. This is Ariel speaking at the news conference last week.
I saw a group of detainees being surrounded by police on the northwest corner of the intersection. A crowd had gathered on the south side, including a number of legal observers with our bright green hats. There were lines of police officers in the intersection facing us, separated from us by yellow police tape and a row of police motorcycles. People were shouting at the officers to release those people being detained across the street. It was tense, but it did not feel noticeably different from other peaceful protests I've been at. After about 10 minutes, all of a sudden, without warning, the police officers in the intersection began dousing our crowd with pepper spray. The pepper spraying was completely unprovoked. The police hadn't given an order to disperse, and I did not see anyone menacing or threatening the officers before they started spraying. I buckled over, coughing and choking.
That's legal observer Judah Ariel with the National Lawyers Guild. So, Scott Michelman, what are you demanding in your lawsuit as we wrap up?
Our lawsuit seeks damages in an amount to be determined by the jury, because we believe that a jury should decide how much of a message needs to be sent to the MPD that they must respect and honor demonstrators' free speech rights rather than chilling them.
Scott Michelman, senior attorney for the ACLU of the District of Columbia, lecturer at Harvard Law School, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us. As we end today's broadcast in Brazil, where federal prosecutors have charged President Michel Temer with corruption, accusing the president of taking millions of dollars in bribes. Prosecutor Rodrigo Janot said Temer has fooled Brazilian citizens. Temer is Brazil's first sitting head of state to be formally charged with a crime. Addressing reporters Tuesday, President Temer dismissed the allegations.
They want to stop the country, stop the Congress, in a political act with fragile and precarious accusations hitting at the presidency of the Republic.
The charges against the current president, Temer, comes less than a year after Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff was impeached in what many described as a legislative coup. Her impeachment came as Brazil was engulfed in a major corruption scandal, but Rousseff herself was never accused of any financial impropriety. Since President Rousseff's ouster last year, Brazil's corruption scandal has only widened. At the center of the scandal are many of the right-wing politicians who orchestrated her ouster. Well, to talk more about the situation, we're going to Rio de Janeiro to speak with David Miranda, a journalist and the first LGBTQ member of the Rio City Council. David, welcome to Democracy Now! Talk about the significance of the indictment of the sitting president of Brazil.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me. We have facing a major crisis in Brazil right now, and with these denounces coming from the attorney prosecutor, it shows like how Brazil is so corrupt. The lower house is going to be having to vote for Temer to go out. 2/3 of that has to vote against him, and as we know, many of them are corrupt as well. So we are facing a very struggle in Brazil. If they are going to be on his side or the side of the population, they are going to be going to the streets on the 30th now to do a major strike, and it can last 48 hours. So we are hoping that public opinion will change the mind of those corrupt politicians so he can vote. The Temer has to go out now.
Can you talk about what Temer is charged with, this accusation of taking millions of dollars in bribes?
Yeah, he's accused by bribery and obstruction of justice because 3 months ago, he was caught in a tape 11 at night on the palace where he lives in Brasilia, with one of the biggest businessmen from JBS. He was talking to this guy, and he was asking for money and also to obstruct justice by the former lower house, Eduardo Cunha. So he wants to send money to him so keep him quiet. So that's why it's the accusation. And it took 3 months for the Attorney General take a look on the evidence, and he find out the reply saying that he's actually being charged for this because the tapes are real and there's evidence for that, and now he just have to send that to the STF that is going to the lower house.
I want to go to Michel Temer speaking in 2016 following the ouster of President Dilma Rousseff.
My first word to the Brazilian people is the word trust. Trust in the values that form the character of our people, the vitality of our democracy. Trust in the recuperation of our country's economy, our country's potential in its social and political institutions.
So that was Temer last year, right after he was involved with the ouster of Dilma Rousseff. What happens now, David?
Well, it's funny because we took a presidency. Her party is very corrupt. She was charged for fiscalization. She changed the move economically, but she was not charged with corruption. And now we have the first president in history that is charged actually with criminal and for obstructing justice. And we're facing a decision because Temer was the choice of the elites of Brazil for changing and pass the laws that subjudge the labor and the Brazil. So he was doing the work, the dirty work in Brazil. But right now, they're facing like he's not going to be able because the public opinion is changing towards him. So the old parties are getting together now in Brazil, like PT, the Works Party from Dilma, PSDB, the former President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and they don't want Temer to go out now. They wanted Temer to stay into the next year for the election. So they probably will wrap it up, everything they can to keep Temer in there. So we are facing like the public wants Temer out, but the old parties doesn't want him out.
I want to ask you, David, about what happened earlier this year during a protest in Rio de Janeiro, where you are now, when you were hit by a car yourself after setting up traffic cones to block vehicles. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, I got up 2 in the morning to do a strike with everybody else in the city, with the youth. So we are blocking the streets so people don't get into their work in downtown. So I was blocking the street with cones, and this car came, and he didn't stop. He just ran over me, and I just pushed my arms in the top of the car and just pushed aside. And the funny thing is, like, we posted that video on Facebook, and there's so many comments saying that he did the right thing. And this just shows how, like, the internet and how people are just, like, moving towards politicians because they are not believing politicians anymore, like exactly what happened in the U.S. And it can happen now in Brazil because, like, Trump is right over there, and now we have this, like, big faces happening here. Bolsonaro, that is just like Trump. But at the same time, like, right there in the U.S., you have Bernie Sanders, who just raised the socialists, a really good part of the left, as much here in Brazil, the PSOL, the party that I'm part of it. So as much that day was, like, traumatic to me, I even saw the people's face in there and the struggles they are fighting together, the young and the old people, and that was like an achievement for life for me. In that moment, I knew there was on the right side of this fight.
Finally, we have just 15 seconds. The strike is planned for Friday, Friday this week.
Yeah, this Friday, the 30th of June, it will be for 48 hours. We are planning with the strike with the youth, the workers' class, the syndicates. Everybody's going to stop Brazil, and I don't think Temer can resist to this. I think he will fall. But the only concern here is like Temer falling. Rodrigo Maia, who is the head of the law house, who replaced Eduardo Cunha, the gangster, for 15 years in the prison now, also is charged on the car wash. He's being charged by corruption as well. So Brazil faces a very crisis on this moment now because the big part of the politicians here are very corrupt.
We have to leave it there. David Miranda, journalist and first LGBTQ member of the Rio City Council. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.